Hello, dear listeners. Today we're here with Dina Sherif, a renowned expert in the fields of economic development, risk capital, in addition to entrepreneurship and innovation. Welcome, Dina. It's nice to have you here. First question for you, Dina. You've been in this game for over 2 decades. So, what's the most memorable lesson you've learned from women entrepreneurs that left you saying, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming?
Oh, that's a tough question. Honestly, I have to say, in years of working with women entrepreneurs, I think the thing that continues to surprise me is how much after all these years, the patriarchy is still very much a part of us as women. So, in other words, I think what continues to surprise me sometimes is our own internal biases that we have also inherited from, decades and decades and decades of a deeply patriarchal system. And I think as much as I say to myself, even myself as a woman entrepreneur, I've caught myself so many times, making myself a little smaller or sitting silent in a room of men, or, sometimes taking a path of being a lot more aggressive than is very natural to me, just so that I can be heard. So I think if I were to say what continues to surprise me is our own inability to shake the patriarchy out of ourselves. And I think that requires a lot of work, but that requires a lot of work also with men, because women talking to women is just not going to suffice, right? For the patriarchy to transform as a system to one that's truly inclusive, it's just going to take a lot of work from both men and women to really hold each other accountable to the biases that we've all taken in from society, and also from really looking at the biases that are deeply inherent in our systems.
Nice. Interesting. Okay. So creating and working with global networks is very important for women leaders. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of working with a global network and navigating that dynamic?
I don't see working with a global network as a challenge. I see it as a huge opportunity. And look, the world is an extremely diverse place. We come from a world of very different cultures and ways of seeing the world and ways of thinking and ways of showing up. And so while I do think it's challenging sometimes to work with networks of people who are simply just not homogeneous, I just see it as an amazing opportunity to become more human. Because I think the more you're exposed to different opinions, different ways of thinking, different cultures, the more we become agents of empathy and understanding and tolerance, but also the more we start seeing the things that are common amongst us and not just the things that are different. And then we also start seeing the things that are different as beautiful and ways that we can actually leverage and tap into those differences. I think you can only get that from being a part of a global network.
Next question, Dina. What is the most underrated aspect of diversity, especially in the work that you do?
I think what's underrated about diversity is diversity in thinking. Because I think, in the entire discourse around diversity, we often think about skin color, ethnicity. We think about diversity in age. We think about diversity in gender. And I think all of that is important, right? But I think diversity of thinking is, I think, what is really underrated. And I think that is the biggest challenge when it comes to diversity, because to make a conscious decision to be in a room with somebody who has completely different opinions and views than you, and to make a decision to hear them out and create space for what can be completely different than what you believe to be true, I think that is what's going to transform the world. And, I actually think that we live in this bizarre place of cancel culture, and I think that's just a product of our inability to be able to hold space for different thinking and respect that we all have different opinions, and that can be okay. But I also think that, I'm also an educator, so I also teach. I also think I'm not sure that we're doing a really good job educating the younger generation to hold space for different opinions, even if that opinion is the complete opposite side of the spectrum of yours. And, I've seen this live with the recent crisis of Gaza and the extreme opinions in that. You see it in the United States when you're thinking about conservative versus liberal. I think it's really challenging to create space for diversity of thinking. But I also think that is the biggest opportunity within the diversity and inclusion space. And if we can really create spaces of tolerance, not just for just differences in how we look, or differences in ethnicity and differences in gender, but also really embrace the differences in our ideologies and opinions, I think the world is just going to become a very different place, and we'll all evolve and grow and be better because of it.
And now my favorite question. What advice would you give 20-year-old Dina?
Learn how to say no, and don't feel bad about it. That came out really fast. I think women, when I was 20, and that was a long time ago, right? So I think when I was in my 20s, I found myself getting into this habit of always taking on more, doing more, because I felt like I had to always prove myself to the world and prove that I was capable and prove that I could achieve just as much as anybody else. And I think that takes a toll. I think you have to be able to say no, and you have to prioritize your own self-care. And you can't do everything. You do have to be selective about what you can do, and that's okay. So I think, I would tell my 20-year-old self to learn how to say no and create boundaries. Because if you don't, then other things pay the price, like your health, your own well-being, and I'm just not sure it's worth it.
If you could have a roundtable discussion today with influential figures, dead or alive, who would they be?
That is such a great question. So, honestly, there's only one person who comes to my mind. If I could have a conversation with one person that, whose story has deeply impacted me, one of them would be Khadija, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's first wife. And that's because Khadija was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in all of Arabia. When she met he wasn't a prophet at the time, but when she met him, she was 40 years old. She had been divorced. She proposed to him. She decided to marry him. She decided to include him in her business. That for me is the complete embodiment of what agency for women looks like. But yet we have lived for decades talking about how Islam oppresses women. And I think She is the embodiment of what power looks like, and what owning your power looks like, and what it looks like to make decisions that make sense for you, including choosing who you want to marry. And honestly, if I could have a conversation with anybody, I would love to have a conversation with her. What was going through your mind? How are you making your decisions? And, what was that like for you? I think also, if I were to add another person into that conversation, it might be, a toss-up between somebody like Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, because these people really demonstrated what peaceful resistance looks like and what patience looks like. And we live in a world of instant gratification. And I'm not sure that patience is a virtue that we truly embrace anymore. But these two people demonstrated what patience looks like and how patience is so critical to achieving change in the long term. And honestly, for me as Dina, I'm not sure that patience is always my virtue. And I always have conversations with myself in my head saying, Dina, you need to be patient. Change takes time. And, you need to meet people where they are. And I think if you're going to engage in leadership, you have to be willing to be patient and to pace the work so that you can bring people along with you. And I feel like nobody did that better than those two. So I think those would be people I would add to the mix. And this is cliche, but my mother is also, for me, the true embodiment of what patience and sacrifice looks like, right? She had a career. She came from a generation of women who didn't have careers. She really had to push her way through and create her own space in the world. While raising 3 children, my dad immigrated to the US. She had to kind of learn how to use English. Like, there are so many things that she had to be as a woman. And I'm not sure that my generation of women could do as much as her generation that we are willing to, I would say, really persevere and really use grit to get your way through, but to do it with grace and dignity and maintain the same kind of feminine motherly energy that she's always had, I think is just, I still have so much to learn from her.
And finally, what is your vision for a truly inclusive society? What does that look like?
I've thought about this a lot over the past couple of years, because at the center we have a number of fellowship programs, and I've thought a lot about, and the word inclusion has become used everywhere these days, and I think for me it comes down to one thing. I think society wants us to fit in. Society wants homogeneous spaces. We want to find like-minded people. We want to be in spaces of like-minded people. And if we feel like we're different, then we want to tweak ourselves a little bit so we can fit in to the spaces that we want to be a part of. And I think that is the enemy of inclusion. Fitting in is the enemy of inclusion, because fitting in is very different than belonging. Belonging means everybody can show up as they are and feel that it's okay. And I think for me, that is the biggest shift I'd like to see in this world, because I think belonging is a very different thing than fitting in. And if we can create spaces of belonging, then we can also create freedom and truly embrace what freedom means, which means that I can exist and I can be different than somebody else, but we can all show up as we are, and that's okay. And that's not to say that, we're going to accept like bad behavior or, values that are completely off off the charts of humanity. That doesn't mean that I'm going to say, oh, it's okay to tolerate somebody who supports genocide. No, right? So obviously, I'm talking about within the realm of what values we hold dear in terms of being respectful to each other as humans, and embracing the goodness of what humanity has to offer. I think we just need to allow for a lot more belonging and a lot less fitting in.
Thank you very much, Dina. It was absolutely amazing having you around.